So basically it exists, but they've got the populace of the planet confused and deluded into thinking that voting matters and that my government is different and from your government, and in fact that the wars are not co-opted and planned long before they break out. And as long as they're killing us and keeping us shooting at each other for their purposes, we lose.
I call this a world of duality. In order for you to have good, you have to have bad. You have to have peace if you have war, etc., right?
Correct. One must accept the harshness within themselves in order to find anything beyond that.
Cliff, the depression, the Fed, the wars, 911.
Need not exist.
All that's...
Yeah.
Exactly. That seems to be all engineered. So what you're saying, and let's go extraterrestrial disclosure, would that also be engineered? In reality, it's a stage, maybe a false flag event. What do you say?
That need not be mutually exclusive. In other words, yes, it could be engineered and it could be quite factual and not false in all.
Now, how would we differentiate? If they have technology...
It does not matter. If you postulate that the powers that be are not their own masters, that there's something beyond the 27 layers of classified security above the president, and there's something beyond that person, maybe that ultimately that beyond leads to something that is not necessarily native to Earth. And so it's quite possible that they've decided that they'll release the information in this particular way. And it need not matter to us whether it is false or not. We simply have to decide what's our attitude about it and how we will react. And if they're trying to use it to generate fear, then I'm going to be unfearful.
In your research through the years, who do you think really controls this planet?
That's nothing we should really discuss. I mean, but basically you get to the point where you can follow the names, and you start following the names, and they're in a relationship, and you arrive with an idea that there's about 13 families or groups, small collectives that control everything.
Right. So you don't think there's a power higher than those 13 families behind them?
There's evidence for that, but it starts getting real sketchy, and so it's nothing conclusive at this stage. I know that you can get that far, and until we can actually sit down with the members of those 13 families and introduce them to a discussion that involves the use of a stick, we won't find out.
Cliff, on this show, we can handle the truth. Can you share with us some of what's in Part 6?
If we go... Okay, let's put it this way. Let's look at the idea that there's that we have three layers of possibility. And then I'll discuss specifics, okay? The three possibilities are that I'm a nut job and everything I'm saying is not meaningful. That's number one. The second possibility is that I'm a nut job and it doesn't matter, and in fact what I say will occur. And then there's the third possibility. Now the third possibility comes into how we get our data. So let's say that I'm suggesting that all hell breaks loose in war after November 5th of this year, and that we're seeing it in the linguistics that are going to show up at that point. Well, each of these three possibilities could describe that linguistics. In other words, I could be wrong and everybody on the planet is laughing at me on November 5th. Ha, 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 he was wrong. And they use the same words that we would see, talking about the war that I'd predicted that didn't exist, et cetera, right? So those linguistics would show up, and then we become, in that essence, a self-fulfilling prophecy, in that the linguistics show up simply because we missed the prediction. Or the second possibility exists, and that is that we say that there's going to be a war, and a nasty war actually breaks out in which the United States, basically the Anglo-American empire fueled by the Federal Reserve, kind of stretches itself so thin that the fabric that holds it together dissolves, and it does so catastrophically for pretty much everybody on the planet. And so therefore I would be right, because just before things get really bad, there would be some linguistics showing up on the internet and through newspapers that describe the war and the effects, and the words that we've said will appear. Does this make sense so far?
Yes, it does.
Then there's a third. Okay, there's a third possibility.
Okay.
The third possibility is the very intriguing one, because I don't know if it actually exists or not. But say that I'm correct and that the linguistics will appear between November 5th and the end of December relative to this war and this tension and international crises and so on. Maybe that set of linguistics shows up not because I was wrong and not because we have a war, but because we all decide between now and then that we're not going to allow it. And we discuss the hell out of it to the point that the powers be realize that they're just, 5 short minutes from a quick introduction to a pitchfork and a bonfire. And then they decide, ooh, we can't do that. Everybody's wising up. And then we get to the same state in November, and instead of having giant headlines that say war and defeat of the Anglo-American Empire, etc., it says, hey, we all won. We averted a war globally. Now let's get on and do some real work. So all three possibilities exist. It's not up to me to determine which one will occur.
Cliff, don't the powers that be take advantage of the impressionable people? For example, November the 8th, you're saying that we may be going to war. Isn't that a possibility?
Correct.
That people may say, wait a minute, that is the Battle of Armageddon, just like the Bible says. So don't they create prophecies?
Sure. And I'm
quite
sure that the prophecies that are included in the Judeo-Islamic Christian tradition were engineered specifically for this time, done by beings that knew what they were doing relative to time. Bear in mind that I've been making predictions professionally for number of years now, and I have a certain level of skill in it, and I do a lot of research about those things that I'm involved in. And so I've come across all different kinds of people that used to do things relative to time in the past. And I'm quite convinced, for instance, that, the Bible is no more divine than yesterday's newspaper out of San Francisco. That in fact it was engineered for specific purposes, and that the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition has a specific reason for existence at this time, and thus we're into a set of circumstances where the prophecies that they put into that place way back when are happening. But it's kind of like my self-fulfilling prophecies in that sense. If you know what's going to occur, it isn't prophecy very much. It's just, noting down a few of the linguistics and describing the situation.
Did you see September the 11th happen?
Sure.
Back then?
Sure. We actually posted about it in 85 or 90 days before it occurred.
But you could not pinpoint exactly what was going to happen. You just showed an event, right?
That was an interesting situation. I have a lexicon, okay? This lexicon is basically a giant word list. And I had just started off in the A's and was working my way down to the Z's in English and had yet to get to T where terrorism was involved. Therefore, I didn't get the terrorism word. And by shortly thereafter, I had terrorism worked into my model, and sure enough, we started picking it up. It was just a matter of timing. But we got military accident, money center being attacked, the tipping point, the planet changes, life never the same, et cetera, et cetera.
So December 21st, 2012, what is the webbot telling you?
That date is rather immaterial at one level and quite significant at another. It was actually engineered in the Gregorian calendar that the Mayan Codex, which is to say the Mesoamerican long count, the Aztec, et cetera, would end at 11:11 a.m. on that particular date, and they did so by screwing around with the difference between the Julian and the Gregorian calendar. So the powers that be wanted that particular combination of numbers to match the end of the Mayan long count. Did I say that correctly so that you understand? They went to some mathematical trouble to make it come out to that date and that time, 11:11 a.m. So they have specific expectations. I don't have those expectations because there's a lot of trouble from my viewpoint, not being part of the powers that be, but rather just being yet another human crawling around on the planet Earth. We're going to have a whole lot more trouble than that will prevent us from really caring about that date. So by the time you reach March of 2012, you won't care much about December. You'll be much too preoccupied with what's going on right that instant.
That sounds very cryptic, but I see what you're saying. Is there any language of what would happen December of 2012?
The description that we get seems to imply the following idea. Okay? The idea is that 2012 represents a midpoint, an exact center of alignment between our solar system and the middle of a magnetic band that encircles the Milky Way galaxy, and that's the point of maximum squeeze. And that's the kind of language we get. Now, the squeeze has been bad as we go in. Sort of think about it as our entire solar system is going into a giant magnetic version of a pressure cooker. And once you're in the pressure cooker, you seal the lid on with the water in there, and then you slowly add the heat, and it gradually builds up the steam. And then once you've got a little bit of steam coming out, you put the little cap on, and that weight allows pressure to build up inside that vessel. And that's kind of what's happening to our solar system. Everything is being squeezed. The sun's being squeezed, all the planets are being squeezed, and we see those visible effects everywhere. Anything on all those planets, including ourselves, is being squeezed, and we feel the effects. Not being able to sleep, irritability, muscle aches, all of these kind of things that are coming not from internal things, but rather from this giant magnetic effect that's coming on us. And we're seeing it in the impact on animals and plants, especially the sea life and birds. They're dying en masse simply because they're super magnetic sensitive in the way that we dolts are not. In any event, the real problem is when the squeeze lets up. When we cross that midpoint and we go for the next 10 years, from 2012 on, for 10 years, we're leaving the pressure cooker and gradually having the squeeze lifted off of us, and things start popping back. Now, the problem with all cycles, as we know, if you go too extreme one way, you go too extreme the other in order to balance out.
So you're saying it's a release type of language, like a rubber band releasing?
No, it's much more like the pressure coming off of a pressure cooker, and even though it's going to come off slow, stuff inside that pressure cooker is going to feel the effects. So right at the moment, as the squeeze comes onto the Earth, we're seeing more and more magma activity because it's magnetically sensitive, and the Earth is being squeezed, and the magma reacts as the continents are actually squeezed closer to the middle of the Earth. It need only be